Guys? MMA analyst here to just do a little video. My Nick Diaz against the top 5. That's coming soon. I was gonna do this this world-class athlete video. Just talk a little bit about that. So let's get right down to it. First things first, let's preface this video with number one. I do think that being a mixed martial artist at the highest level is very difficult. Just to train, to get to, and I don't mean in the UFC. I mean to be a top fighter in the UFC. Anybody with 3 wins and no losses can get to the UFC. I mean, getting to the UFC is not tough for an athlete, to be honest. That's part of the issue. It's a growing sport, so there aren't thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have been training their whole life to get a shot at the UFC. Yeah, there's maybe a couple thousand people that have been training for a couple years, or if you include the thousands that have been training with the thousand that have been fighting and maybe past their prime. But it's not like the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, whatever different leagues, UEFA and Bundesliga and Serie A and all this, whatever. It's not like that. It's not like the NFL, where you've got, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of kids enrolled, playing football, playing baseball, t-ball, growing up, knowing that what they want to do is play in that professional league, and then having to go all through grade school, high school, trying to get to a college to play in that sport, and then going from college and hoping to try and get drafted. That's not happening in MMA. In MMA, it's I like fighting. I'm 25 years old. I'll give it a shot. I'm in shape. I don't mind getting punched. Different people have their different reasons. Some guys are jiu-jitsu artists. Some guys are wrestlers. They finish, Division 1, Division 2 wrestling. That's a great base. The Brazilian jiu-jitsu artists. They're Muay Thai specialists. Whatever it is. But it's not something where they've been, for sure, they've been doing wrestling their whole life maybe. Or maybe jiu-jitsu their whole life. And wrestling is very tough. To become a Division 1 champion, very tough. It is more of like what I was saying with the basketball and stuff, like people like really trying to get there and whatever. But fighting, being a professional fighter to try and become number 1 in the world in your division, that's tough, very tough. And most people aren't going to get there. But getting into the UFC, I mean, Edward Filoloto can tell you, anybody can get in the UFC. I'm not trying to call out names, but, part-time school teachers can get into the UFC. I'm not talking about Rich Franklin. Talking about heavyweights and whatnot. So getting into the UFC is not something that is unattainable. If I'm an average, in shape, athletic individual, male between 18, 25, and I say I'm going to dedicate myself to getting into the UFC within a year and a half, if I can win 5 fights in a row, I've got a real good shot of getting into the UFC. If I'm an 18-year-old kid, tip-top shape, been playing basketball my whole life, really good in my high school, and I say I want to get into the NBA within the next 4 years, odds are I'm not making it. It doesn't matter. Odds are I'm not making it. And that happens everywhere. I want to be, I want to be a pro golfer. Sure you will. No, you won't. Basically, anybody who wants to be a professional hockey player, basketball player, football, baseball, you're not going to be a pro. That's actually the reality of it. And then people slip through. Like 1 out of the 30,000 slip through. And you have 500 guys in the league and 500,000 people who fell short. And that's definitely not the case in MMA. So that's number one. Getting into the UFC, into the top fighting division, the organization in the world, you don't have to be all that great. And just by fighting in that organization doesn't make you a top athlete. It just makes you in the best organization or the biggest organization or maybe both in the world, but it doesn't make you a top athlete. And you could even do well as just being a really tough SOB, but it doesn't make you a top athlete. That makes you one hell of a fighter. That might make you really entertaining. That might make you a lot of things, but it doesn't make you a world-class fighter. But let's move on. World-class fighters can't be world-class fighters unless they can train like world-class fighters or world-class athletes. Take all the thing I just said, fighters, and change it to athlete. To be at the top level in the NBA, do you know the kind of money that the teams, that the organization, that the league spends on the athletes to maintain and to get that level of world-class athlete? Do you know the kind of ridiculous amount of money put behind each individual player so that if they're injured, if they need the workouts, who's working, they don't have their buddy doing their workout schedule. They've got the best in the world. When something happens and you're in the NFL, you got the best in the world behind you. The best. And that costs money. How's a guy making $8,000 a fight going to be able to afford that? He can't. So he's got his boy, he's got the MMA guy, he's got whoever it is. For the most part, and in the end of the day, you can't be a world-class athlete training with some regular-ass equipment, with just some everyday, I can get that in my high school. You can't be a world-class athlete doing that. You have to have world-class equipment. You have to have world-class all that stuff. Not saying you can't be a greatest fighter. Not saying you can't be Fedor. Well, Fedor, he's an amazing fighter. He's a world-class athlete, though? Come on now. Next. It still has to do with the money. But you can't be a world-class athlete with a part-time job. These guys in these other leagues making millions of dollars, they got training camps where they just train for months before the season starts. Then the season starts, they play their games, and then that's all they do. And they get paid good money so that all they can do is be amazing athletes, so that they can build their body up, so that they can resist all of the type of trauma and damage that it's going to go through. How can somebody who has to work at the airport on Monday, 5 days a week, who only trains after work, how can that guy become a world-class athlete? I mean, he needs heart. He needs dedication because he's got to go to work in the morning, or maybe he runs in the morning, goes to work, trains in the afternoon. Come on, man. World-class athlete can't do that. World-class athletes have to train like world-class athletes. So not only do they have to have the equipment, the coaches, the guys behind them, just pushing them to be what the best they can be, but they also need the time. You got to be able to put in the hours. There's no such thing as a part-time trainer / world-class athlete. Just doesn't happen. So those are three big things. Okay, so that's number one. There are some people in the UFC that have the money, the freedom with just from the money and the time and the coaches and the facilities. There are people like that in the UFC. George St. Pierre, some other guys. Anyways, the point is, some of them in the UFC could be world-class athletes. Some of them could be. But, it is what it is. Like, let's be real. Now, there's a few flawed things. They say, well, if you take a basketball player and you put him on his back against a world-class wrestler, oh, he's going to get tired. And yeah, he will get tired. Absolutely. You want to know why? Because he developed his body to be a world-class athlete in basketball, not in wrestling or in MMA. So yeah, he'll get tired because his body isn't conditioned the way an MMA. It's kind of like saying, I don't know, like a sprinter. He can't do the same thing as one of those Ethiopian guys who run across the whole damn country without taking a glass of water. So therefore, one is better than the other. No, it's just different. Your body's different. And an MMA fighter's body is different than a lot of other, probably any other sport, even boxing. But they're hard on endurance because they got to go, over 12 rounds, 10 rounds, and they're throwing 50, 60, 70 punches around. In MMA, if you throw 60 punches around, you're Nick Diaz and you're breaking records. Everybody else, or you're sloppy, right? Anyways. So, yeah, I agree. Other sports, world-class athletes in a fight with the UFC champion will probably get tired. And that's because they're not MMA fighters. But if you take a wide receiver in basketball, in football, and then you try and see if he can play basketball, he's not going to get tired. If you take somebody who plays soccer and you go tell him to do it's transferable. But if you take these MMA athletes and you tell them to, and again, they're not hockey players, so it's different. But could they even get to that level? Could any MMA fighter switch and go into any other sport and be there, like really do it? Maybe a couple might be able to, but the overall massive majority of them would not be able to cut it. But almost any strong, in shape guy from the NFL who's killing it could learn some wrestling, learn how to throw a few punches, and fight in the UFC. Not be a champ, but at least fight in the UFC. If Chat Ochocinco tomorrow was like, I'm really going to do MMA, I'm leaving my millions and millions of dollars, and I'm going to do MMA, he could make it to the UFC. Would he be champ? Probably not. But would he be able to beat a couple guys? Yeah, because he's just fighting some lesser athletes. So anyways, that's what I have to say about it. Does it make MMA any less of a sport? I don't care, really. I mean, it's two people going in a cage fighting. There's a victor, there's a loser. I think it's the most exciting sport in the world. They could one day be all world-class athletes, and maybe that's in the future when today's kids who are training to be mixed martial artists, maybe when that class has gone through high school, college, and now they're in the UFC, and they're not just a couple years old of fighting, or they haven't just transferred from jiu-jitsu or transferred from Muay Thai. At that point, maybe everybody, or maybe if the fighters ever get paid like the other sports, if they're ever getting millions of dollars, then they can train and live and aspire to be that kind of athlete where their life is changed, etc., and it's worthwhile, right? So there you go. There's my video. Those are my thoughts. Tell me what you think. It is what it is. MMA, it's important. Peace.